Okay, let's gain a better understanding of the terms data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. In order to do that, we're going to look at a hierarchy of the way that these terms relate to one another, known as the DIKW pyramid, or the Data, Information, Knowledge, and Wisdom pyramid. The DIKW pyramid is a model for representing structural and/or functional relationships between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. The pyramid shows how typically information is defined in terms of data, knowledge is defined in terms of information, and wisdom is defined in terms of knowledge. So let's take a look at what I mean by that. What you see here is a bunch of data, essentially symbols, numbers. Data is, in the context of the DIKW pyramid, it's conceived of as discrete, objective facts or observations, which are organized and unprocessed and therefore have no meaning or value because of a lack of context and interpretation. So by symbols, we could be referring to letters and numbers. We might also be in a Boolean value, just true or false would be a piece of data, okay? So sometimes numbers might be a float or they might be an integer, but all of this is just data, simple symbols, but they're meaningless until you can get them in a relationship, okay? So in the DIKW relationship, information is organized or structured data. A great way to think about this is in terms of a spreadsheet. So here we have just a bunch of symbols and just raw data, right? We have numbers, we have letters. You may be able to look at the letters and just have a sort of intuitive knowledge that, oh, this is a word, but does true mean the word true, or does it mean the Boolean value true? Until we can organize this information in relationship to one another, we don't know what that means. So information here in the spreadsheet is when I go ahead and add columns and rows and define these columns and rows, so it gives you a context for the data, okay? Therefore, the information or the data becomes meaningful and valuable and useful and relevant in the context of this spreadsheet. This information in a spreadsheet becomes a lot more useful to us. We can see that it's a staffing sheet for a pizza place, and we can now see that those names that were strings on the just jumbled up data that we saw before are the names of employees, and the other words that were there are the job titles that people are working. So the next bits of information are the shift that those people are scheduled to work, the wage they get paid per hour, and then it turns out that false and true were indeed Boolean values. Boolean values just mean something's true or false again, and you can see who's getting paid overtime and who is not that day. So there's another column titled pay, and that should reflect the total amount of money that that employee is going to get paid on Friday, and this is where knowledge comes in. Because you have the information, you can now use knowledge to calculate pay. And what I mean by that is you can see an employee's working from 9 to 5, that's 8 hours, and their wage is $2.25. So if the Boolean value for overtime is false, that means that employee has not already worked over 40 hours that week and isn't going to get overtime pay. At this restaurant, overtime is time and a half, okay? So if you work 8 hours, you get paid for 12 hours. Or you could look at it the other way and say, if you make $10 an hour, you get paid 50% more, so you're going to get $15 for every hour that you work. That's time and a half. That's overtime pay at this restaurant. So that allows, through knowledge, now as a manager, if you have this data turned into information by putting it in a spreadsheet so you can see the data relative to one another, you can then calculate pay. So you'll see that, for example, Susie, the chef, has worked over 40 hours that week. Her wage is $12.50, and she's working for 8 hours. So if you calculate for time and a half, what you would do is multiply 8 hours times 12.5. You get your $100 is what that comes out to. But since Susie's getting paid overtime, you then give her 50% more, and that's $150 worth of pay. So now, by using the data and looking at it relative to itself and the other data as information, you can then create knowledge, which is, using that information to calculate pay. The next state would be wisdom. And so, for example, wisdom comes through experience. So let's say you've been managing this restaurant for a while and you have some wisdom. You can look at this schedule and you can see that you've got Ted scheduled to wash dishes all day long. You might know that Ted is a terrible dishwasher and he's really slow. So that wisdom might tell you, oh, wow, I'm going to need to schedule a second dishwasher in order to get the work done. That sort of thing comes through wisdom. Or you might look at it and see that Nancy is a busser, and your wisdom might tell you, oh yeah, Nancy is also a waiter, so if we get really backed up, I can have Nancy pick up some tables. So that tells you, oh, maybe I don't need to schedule a second waiter. Now, if you look at the schedule, you'll see that you still have some holes to fill in terms of time, because you've got Bob scheduled to wait tables from 9 to 5, and obviously the restaurant is at least open till 8 from this information. So you can use that knowledge to schedule another person. So what we've got here is data. Data is in the cells on the spreadsheet. Data says things like Bob or host or 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. or the wage, $4.25, or whether or not the employee is working overtime, true or false. And ultimately, once we've calculated, you have the total pay for that employee of the day. That's data. But information comes when you've got it in columns and rows, so you can see that it's actually Bob who is the waiter, or you can see that that false and true actually mean whether or not someone's getting overtime. That's looking at information, or data rather, relative to other data and looking at it in context. So it then becomes usable. And once it's usable, that means that it's information. That makes it information. Okay? And then knowledge is using that information. So in this example, I used the information to calculate the total pay for employees that day. And then wisdom is having done that enough to have some experience and knowing what to do with the information and the knowledge that you'd gathered through analyzing data. So hopefully that helps you understand a little better what the DIKW pyramid, the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom pyramid, what that represents, what that means, and gives you a little better idea of how we use data in information science.